Greetings, YouTube. The author Mark Simmons here, back for the 12th instalment of my readings from the Psionic Powers Trilogy. In this episode, I'll be reading a snippet from chapter 8 of my second novel, Purged in Flame. In the story so far, our protagonist has gone out into the city and to get away from his creator, but now finds himself in a bit more of a dangerous situation, basically. Purged in Flame is available on Amazon via Poe Boy Publishing. As always, I've not rehearsed this, so we'll see how it goes. So yeah, this is an extract from chapter 8, which is called Information. Miss Shelley took them into the reception area and pointed towards the grand staircase that dominated the back wall. Head up the stairs, follow the corridor all the way to the end, and you'll find a ladder that leads up onto the roof. The hatch hasn't been used in years, so it might not open so easily. But what other choice do you have? She looked at her phone again. You had best hurry. What about Eddie? Esther asked as she tried to pull away from Whitfield's grip. She was trying to head back to the room where they had first been led into. He's unconscious, Whitfield replied as he kept his grip firm, and I'm sure as shit I'm not carrying him. They will be here any second, Miss Shelley said as she walked towards the front door. We can't just leave him here, Esther looked back towards the room where Eddie slept. We don't have a choice, Whitfield said as he pulled her towards the stairs. He'll be awake sooner than you think, Miss Shelley stated. Now will you please leave? Oh, Miss Stoker, a voice called from the distance. Your services are required. Whitfield ran up the staircase with Esther struggling to keep her balance as he kept hold of her wrist. The doors at the far end opened and Whitfield ducked down behind the balcony wall. It's Miss Shelley now, and I thought I barred you, Mr. Dagon. This is a matter more important than a minor misdemeanour involving alcohol, the man called Dagon replied. Whitfield glimpsed over the balcony and instantly recognised the leader of the group as he and 5 other men entered the room. The last time he had shared a room with the man, Whitfield hadn't gotten too close to him, and the man had given Whitfield little regard, but the thick beard that hung down onto his chest distinguished him from the other men he had with him. Also the large cigar, which had been perpetually stuck between his teeth the last time they had met, was still there. It seemed that he had managed to escape the attack on the assembly hall, unlike one of his counterparts that had been there with him. Whitfield had seen the body of the man Shannon had called Winston, the polar opposite of Dagon when it came to hair. His bald head had been slumped over the theatre seat he had been impaled against. Whitfield was pretty certain that if Dagon had managed to get away from the assembly hall, then Bala would have too. Shit's going down out there, Dagon continued. People just getting wasted from all major factions of the city. Bala thought it would be wise for us to get out on the streets and round up anyone that's been causing trouble. And what makes you think they would come here? Miss Shelley had lost all of her welcoming tone and only a cold voice remained. Nothing. Dagon rolled the cigar with his tongue. Just doing a sweep of all the neutral spots to see if kicking over some stones reveals anything. Why don't you try the manse? Those people seem like nothing but trouble. We'll get round to them. Right now we are here. Well, I've got nothing to hide, so look around. Miss Shelley paused and then continued. If your boys go about breaking stuff like they did last time, it'll be their asses. It's Bala that has the power, not you, Mr. Dagon, and certainly not these reprobates. She pointed at Dagon's men. We'll try not to do too much damage. Dagon turned to his men, who all wore different types of clothing, but it was the denim jackets they wore that defined them as a gang. Byron, take Kevin and check the rooms down that way. Dagon pointed to his right. Two of the men stepped away from the group, One wore a Union Jack bandana around his head and waved the other onwards, whose hair colour matched the red of the cross on his partner's headwear. As they made their way towards one side of the room, Whitfield noticed the insignia on the two men's jackets. The regal image of a stag holding its head high with bloodied antlers was printed on the back of both. Keegan, you and Franklin checked the other way. Dagan waved a hand in the other direction. And just what will you be doing? Another of the men responded, his face covered with all manner of tattoos, as he looked Dagan up and down. I'll be right here, making sure no one gets past you, Dagan replied as he took a challenging stance. I know you were Winston's man, Keegan, but he ain't here no more. And the last time I checked, I'm still lieutenant. Everyone in the room had stopped to listen to Dagan's words. You heard what Barla said earlier. Winston is gone, and a replacement is needed. You may all be thinking the job is yours. Dagan looked at Keegan to emphasise his point. Well, it ain't. You've got to earn these stripes. He pointed at the lines on the left breast pocket of his jacket. Now that it had been pointed out, Whitfield could see that the jackets all had different badges over the left pocket. In truth, if you were to block out each of their faces, he would have had trouble telling them apart. The only one who had clothing that still stood out was the man still stood behind Dagan, his footwear matching a pair that Whitfield had owned in the past. The black and white checkerboard shoes he wore reminded Whitfield of the night this nightmare had all started. He had managed to lose one of his own pair on the canal next to the manse, while the other lay on the pavement outside his burnt-out apartment. We heard her just fine, Dagan replied as he took a step back towards the designated partner. Things are going to change when we're equals. We'll see. Dagan turned to the man on the checkerboard shoes. Herman, head back outside and tell the rest of the boys to search the exterior of the building. You never know what sort of secret exits this place has. Dagan looked at Miss Shelley as he made the last comment. The hostess gave him little regard as she sat on the edge of the fountain. Whitfield had heard enough. Dagan's men started to fan out below, and he didn't like the idea of answering to those men. He pointed towards the corridor behind them, and Esther gave a nod. Keeping low, they exited the balcony area. The corridor looked much the same as the other as downstairs, but as they pushed on further into the building, it started to look more disused. At its far end, the ladder Miss Shelley had spoken of looked in as good a condition as she said it would. Rust had formed on the screws, and the metal had run off into the wall's paintwork. Above the ladder, a hatch looked just as unused. Whitfield placed a hand on one of the rungs and applied some weight to it. It seemed solid enough. He looked back down the corridor, and the far end seemed a long way away. Turning back, he started to climb the ladder. It groaned with disapproval, and the top fixing came loose. He winced as the sound of it echoed down the corridor, but continued to move up the rungs. At the top, he tried pushing against the trapdoor. It creaked as its long dormant hinges ground against the rust. With a second push, he managed to get it open, but the noise it created reverberated down the long corridor. He pulled himself through the gap and then offered his hand down to Esther. She had that same confused look on her face as she stared back down the corridor. Esther, Whitfield whispered down at her, but she continued to stare back the way he had come. Esther, he tried again, but a little louder. She still ignored him, so he ducked his head down through the hole to see what she was looking at. Dagan stood at the far end, lingering at the top steps. He had his back to them and was calling down into the room below. Whitfield could make out his words, but they sounded like orders, and there was no mirth in them. Esther! Whitfield raised his voice this time, and she looked up at him. He beckoned her to come to join him, and she started to climb the ladder. Looking at Esther, he was sure that she weighed next to nothing. So when she got halfway up the ladder and some of the screws came away from the wall, he knew that it wasn't because of her. Yes, she was causing it, but it had been his initial weight that had done the damage. Whitfield reached down to grab her arm, and as his fingers brushed against nothing but air, he thought that he had missed her. but somehow she seemed to defy gravity and hang below him. He leaned further forward and grabbed her by the arm. His shoulder jolted as it took her full weight, and with a grunt he pulled her up through the hole. Below, the ladder fell away from the wall with a clatter. Whitfield closed the trapdoor. He helped Esther onto her feet. "How did you do that?" Esther asked as she took a step away from him, rubbing at her skin as if she was trying to remove something from it. Whitfield wasn't listening to what she said and was already looking around the small room they were in. "Do what?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. The room was full of old furniture and was covered in dust and cobwebs. There was a light coming from the far corner, so he moved towards it. "Before you caught me, I felt something all over my body. There was a small flight of stairs hidden behind the stacks of chairs, and the light was coming from the top of them." He began to move the piles of chairs as quietly as he could. "Did you hear me?" Esther raised her voice, but for the first time that Whitfield could remember. Whitfield turned to her, and he saw the look of uncertainty on her face. But they needed to stay quiet, so he held a finger to her lips. In the middle of the room, the trapdoor started to open. Whitfield pulled the stack of chairs over, and they fell on top of the hatch, slamming it onto whoever was coming through it. The stairs were now clear, so Whitfield waved for Esther to follow him as he made his way up them. At the top of the steps, a metal door barred their path. Whitfield hoped that the hinges on it had suffered the same troubles as the ones on the ladder, as he put his shoulder into it. He grabbed the handle as his shoulder struck the metal, and it turned. With a screech of protest, the door opened. Heat hit him as he stepped out onto the roof in daylight. There you go. That's another one. That's extract from chapter 8 of book 2. Whitfield, Esther and Eddie have been out in the world, and Eddie's taken them places that they probably shouldn't have gone, and now having to run away from people who don't like what they're doing. Purged in Flame is available on Amazon via Poe Boy Publishing. The links will be in the body of the description of this article, along with my Facebook author page, my Instagram page, my Twitter page. Let me know if you like it. Let me know if you don't like it. All criticism is constructive for me. And catch you next time.